We cannot say we weren't warned. Over half a century ago, the Beach Boys sang, "Don't go near the water. Don't you think it's sad? What's happened to the water? Our water's going bad." Of course, nobody much listened. They're too busy surfing, perhaps, but the brown stuff is hitting the fan. Yesterday, as the heavens opened, so did the dirty water sluices. Our waterways were full of it. The Prime Minister suspended some MPs for disloyalty. If that was meant to clean out the stables, there's more, much more to do. Can the government clean up Britain's rivers? And who's going to foot the bill? And has the Prime Minister reasserted his authority or stored up more problems for the future? Plenty to ask the Environment Secretary, Steve Reed. What would the Conservatives do about a water industry in crisis that they privatised? I'll be joined by Shadow Housing Secretary Kevin Hollinrake. And with us throughout the show, broadcaster and author Stephen Sacker, co-host of the Politics at Sam and Anne's podcast, Anne McElvoy, and the former Labour advisor, John McTernan. Welcome to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. Water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink. Visionary though he was, not even Samuel Taylor Coleridge could have foreseen the calamity facing Britain's 21st century water industry when he wrote the famous line from the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. But he could have been queuing up the startling report from the Public Accounts Committee this week. They tell us that we currently use 14 billion litres of water a day. The National Audit Office predicts that by the year 2050, Britain will find itself 5 billion litres short of usable water each and every day. The Labour titan, Aneurin Bevan, once remarked that on an island made of coal and surrounded by fish, it would take an organising genius to engineer a shortage of both. How is it possible that in a country with a worldwide reputation for being persistently rainy, we can find ourselves without enough fresh water? Well, it's politics, of course. Governments of every stamp tend to spend taxes on stuff that the electorate can see and be grateful for, rather than on fixing our hidden, crumbling 19th century infrastructure. But sooner or later, someone pays the price. We've been here before. Back in 1858, the discharge of raw sewage, dead animals and rubbish had so polluted the Thames that the stench drove MPs out of the riverside rooms of Parliament. The Great Stink, as they called it, led to a vast programme of renewal of the London sewers, led by the great engineer Sir Joseph Bazalgette. Well, it looks as though the bill for neglect since then is about to be presented to us. Someone, somewhere, is somehow going to have to hold their noses and pay up. We'll try to find out who this morning. Well, let's start with the government. A little earlier, I spoke to the Environment Secretary. Steve Reed, it's your ambition to reduce sewage spills by half by 2030. That's a pretty low bar to aim for, isn't it? We only swim in sewage Monday to Wednesday.
It's actually the most ambitious target any government has ever had to reduce sewage pollution. And the reason it's important is because our water sector is absolutely broken. In the general election just a year ago, people were furious that we were seeing record levels of sewage pollution in our rivers and our lakes and our seas, and they voted for change. Well, that change is now coming. This government has put in place 3 building blocks that will lead to that change. The first one is we've reset the system, banning unfair bonuses, multi-million-pound bonuses that the water bosses were paying themselves for overseeing this catastrophic failure, and introducing new prison sentences for polluting water bosses who break the law. The second stage is to rebuild our broken water system. So we've got crumbling sewage pipes, broken and leaking water pipes. We've secured £104 billion of private sector investment, the biggest ever investment in our water sector, that will allow us to rebuild that whole system. But the third building block is the water revolution. We need to reform this sector from top to bottom so that the failure of the past can never happen again. And it's because we put those 3 building blocks in place that I'm now able to say to the British public that this government will cut sewage pollution from the water companies in half within 5 years.
All right, let's unpack some of that. Let's just start with the situation. I understand the ambition is to cut by half, but let's just talk about where we are now. Let's look at yesterday's map. This is midday yesterday, and what this map is showing is the hundreds, actually, of discharges. Just as a person, this is pretty shameful for a modern nation, isn't it?
It's an absolute disgrace. It's a scandal that we're in a position, one of the most advanced nations on the planet, and yet we cannot keep our rivers and our lakes and our seas free of the kind of pollution that we're seeing now, filthying so much of it. I think it became a metaphor under the previous government, actually, for so much that had gone wrong. The rivers that we used to be able to go in as kids, you couldn't now let your children or grandchildren go in. That is why we've taken these steps, put in place these building blocks, so we can completely reform this system from top to bottom.
I'm going to come to that.
Clean up our rivers, lakes, and seas.
I'm going to come to that, but I still want to ask you about your ambition. You want to reduce that awful picture by half. It really isn't that ambitious, is it?
No, Trevor.
Except by comparison with a century and a half of neglect.
Well, up until the election, every year sewage pollution was getting worse and worse and worse. We've turned a corner now. I put in place those building blocks. We've secured £104 billion, the biggest ever investment in our water sector, that we can start to spend.
And after £100 billion, we're still going to be swimming in sewage.
Well, do you know what? I was at an event last week, a skills summit, where we were looking at how we can develop and train people to carry out the 40,000 new jobs that this will create. That isn't the end of our ambition. Over a decade of national renewal, we will be able to eliminate unauthorised sewage spillages. But you have to have staging posts along the way. Cutting it in half in 5 years is a dramatic improvement to the problem getting worse and worse and worse every single year.
This is interesting. Now, this is more interesting. What you're saying, if I heard you correctly, is that you want to get rid of all sewage in the next 10 years. That's the ambition.
Well, the Prime Minister in the general election campaign was talking about a decade of national renewal. We're not going to be able to do absolutely everything in 5 years. £104 billion is more money. £104 billion is more money than we've ever spent in the water sector. It cuts it in half, but of course we then want to go on to eliminate unauthorised sewage spills so we can restore our rivers, lakes and seas to the purity that we knew when we were younger.
Let's talk about where you're going to get all the money from. Can I just start with one of the ideas that seems to have been floated today? Are you open to the idea of charging more to affluent families in order to take the edge off for less well-off families?
Well, if you're talking about social tariffs, the water companies already have social tariffs, and they increased them last year when the bills went up to pay for the failure to maintain under the previous government.
Would you encourage them to do more of that?
Those already exist. I'm not sure whether they need to do more. You know, I understand that Sir John Cunliffe will be presenting his report tomorrow. Of course, he may make recommendations on that. We have to look at what he's going to say.
But you wouldn't be against the cross-subsidy. I mean, Labour's about redistribution, isn't it?
Well, they already exist. There's already a scheme in place.
If you would encourage more. Because we know from Ofwat that 20% of families struggle to pay their bills.
I'd need to be convinced that we need to do more, but there are already schemes in place to support the poorer families who would otherwise struggle to pay their bills. I've not been convinced yet that there needs to be even more of that. My interest is, particularly having seen the bill rises that we had last year. That was the result of years of failure to maintain the system properly, to invest in it. With the changes we're making, there will be much better maintenance ongoing. That means that we can protect families from those massive bill hikes in future. My interest is that.
I get that.
I don't think people should have to pay through the nose for something just because the water companies and the regulator let it get into such an appalling state.
When you say you want to protect families from massive bill rises in future, are you going to promise to limit increases in bills to inflation?
Well, there's a process and the regulator will be overseeing how that works. But what we can
But you can set the regulator an ambition. You can tell the regulator this is what you need to do.
What happened previously was the previous government allowed water companies to get away with underinvestment in our sewage and water system. That means the pipes crumbled, and anyone that owns a home will know if you see a crack in the wall and you leave it for 10 years, it gets far worse and it costs you more to fix it. That's where we were. That's why we got the big hike in bills. The new system that we're looking at will make sure that with adequate investment, 104 billion we've got going in, that kind of problem won't recur. We won't see those big bill rises
Let me stop you there. Previous government made the regulator focus on keeping bills down. That is why the water companies will say that they didn't have enough leeway to invest. So what are you going to do? Are you going to say to the regulator, your job continues to be to keep prices down, preferably below the rate of inflation? Or are you going to say, you know, reality strikes, we are going to have to charge more so that we make sure that, by the way, after your £100 billion investment, the water companies say they're going to need another 180, 190 billion over the next 10 years to fix the system. Next 20 years, I beg pardon, to fix the system.
Bills need to be as low as possible. There were companies under the previous, under the current regulatory system that were committing to spend certain amounts of money upgrading their pipes, but then they didn't upgrade them. Yet they found the money to pay bonuses and dividends. Now, that should never have been allowed to happen. If that money had been invested where it should have been invested,
I know the bonus and dividend thing.
Have got the bill hikes.
I know the bonus,
the
bonus and dividend thing is nice politically, but let's just halt here. This is to pension funds. It's not to fat capitalists. It's the pension funds who own most of these water companies. So let's put that to one side.
Ownership, but whoever owns it, they shouldn't get away with failing to upgrade the pipes when they've said they will upgrade the pipes and have been given a bill rise to allow them to upgrade the pipes. They got away with murder, and they're not going to be doing that with this government.
My point is, you can deflect us with getting at the rich, what's supposedly rich people, but the real choice for government is, do you allow prices to rise and provide money for investment, or do you say, let's keep the prices down now and starve the companies of investment?
You need appropriate levels of investment, and you need appropriate bill rises.
What does that mean? Does that mean inflation or not?
Well, a small, steady increase in bills is what people expect. That's what happens in most bills that I pay.
That's not what took place this year, so no more of that.
No, it was an outrage this year, and I'm furious about it.
Okay.
It happened because the companies did not invest the money they said they would invest in upgrading the water pipes, and the poor old bill payer has had to collar the lot for that. We won't let that happen again. I'm going to revolutionise this system so the failures of the past do not happen again in the future.
Is part of the revolution getting rid of the current regulator, Ofwat?
Well, I've asked Sir John Cunliffe to complete a report, and he's going to tell us tomorrow what his recommendation is. So, like you, we're all on tenterhooks to see what he's going to recommend. I will then respond to what he says.
Let's be grown up here. You know what you're going to do, and I know you're not going to tell me what's in Cunliffe's report, but would you be surprised, disappointed, angry if he said, get rid of Ofwat?
We've had his interim report, so we know that he agrees with the conclusion of, I guess, most of your viewers and me. This system is broken and regulation has failed.
So you would
exactly what we we do to fix regulation.
So you would accept?
I genuinely asked Sir John to come up with his own
if he's recommended, you'd be minded to accept that regulation, the abolition of Ofwat.
Well, let's see what he's got to say. I mean, he's not going to just come in with one recommendation. It's something like a 400-page report. There's going to be a lot in there, and I guess it's not going to be very, very simple in many respects. But we'll find out tomorrow. As I said to you right at the beginning of this interview, we've got building blocks in place to turn this system upside down because it's let down everyone, customers, the environment and investors. We're going to reset it from top to bottom so the water sector of the future will be a success story for this country.
All right, look, the issue that you have to deal with isn't just about cleanliness of the water. It's also how we manage these utilities to support economic growth. One of the issues that is emerging is the building of homes can be constrained by the unavailability of water resources. Do you have any idea how many homes are not being built because of water constraints?
Not the exact number, but you pointed to an extremely important problem. I'm aware that development, house building around Cambridge, was held back by a lack of clean water around Oxford in Oxfordshire, from a lack of sewerage systems. We need a system that allows us to put in place the water infrastructure for new homes to go ahead. It's not just new homes, it's also business. If we want the data centres and the gigafactories, which are the economy of the future, they use a vast amount of water. And if we can't plan for those new factories and places of employment without having in place the water infrastructure to allow them to operate. So that vast amount of money, the 104 billion that we're bringing in, a large part of that will go to upgrading water infrastructure so that economic development.
But it only gets spent. It only gets spent if the planning regime allows it. Do you think that economic growth is being restrained at the moment because of the absence of water?
I don't have an absolute figure, but I think it will have cost the economy tens of billions of pounds. The fact that our water infrastructure is in such a poor state, and the fact that we are not aligning water infrastructure investments with spatial planning being where the factories go, where the homes go. Those two things need to be aligned far better. So part of the revolution that we'll be looking at is how do we ensure that alignment? The Chancellor is very interested in getting this right as well. It's one of the issues she and I discuss the most when we sit down and talk, how we can make water work for the economy.
There's one other element that's in your territory. Deputy Prime Minister sat in that chair and she said she'd never allow anything to stand in the way of building the 1.5 million homes she's promised us. Yet you're going to amend her planning reforms to give Natural England a veto, effectively, over development if it thinks that the plans might affect fragile or rare habitats. Does that mean that we're going to have £100 million bat tunnels all over again?
We're absolutely not going to be having that anymore. What a shocking waste of money that was. It constrained a major infrastructure project, a railway line. But I'm not aware that it's actually what you're going to do in the future. Bats.
So you're warning the tree huggers. It's all over now.
What we saw under the last government was the economy flatlining, but also nature in decline. We can do better. We can have a win-win for both. So what we're looking at is how we can allow the building to go ahead, but also help nature to recover. And the Nature Restoration Fund means the developers will fund the upgrades in nature.
But you're doing the same thing. You're going for you're saying there's going to be a balance. At the end, you have to choose. Is it growth or is it...
Well, the last government chose decline in both the economy and nature. I choose a win-win. We can have both. If we can get that money and we can recover nature across whole landscapes, we can allow the house building to go ahead elsewhere. It's a win-win, Trevor.
You used to call that Boris Johnson cakeism, but I just want... let's move on, because there's something I want to ask you about before we end. Prime Minister withdrew the whip from just 4 members of Parliament for what has been described as persistent rebellion. I won't use the phrase that's being knocking around. But there are others who've rebelled many more times than, for example, Rachel Maskell, and they haven't been punished. This looks a bit spiteful because she beat you on the welfare reform bill.
I wasn't involved in those particular decisions, but it is true to say we campaigned together as a Labour team. We won together as a Labour team, and we now
but politics is not all about winning, it's also about
principles. We need to govern together as a Labour team. Now, all of us from time to time are going to have things that we're concerned about or we want to discuss with colleagues. There are ways of going about that, and there are ways of not going about that. If you put yourself too far outside of the rest of the team, you're undermining the team, and you can't allow that to go on. As I understand it, these suspensions were not for any one particular issue. They were a pattern of behaviour, but I think it's the right signal to send that stray too far outside, you're letting the whole team down, and we can't allow that.
What does the Prime Minister really think? He said, after amending the welfare reform bill, that the bill now struck the right balance. These are his words.
Yeah.
Now, without Rachel Maskell's resistance to the proposals, he would never have changed those proposals. So why is she now being punished for helping him get to the right balance?
It's not about just one incident. It's a
she's rebelled as far as we can make out once on this issue.
Nobody managing a team can let one player just go off and play to their own separate strategy.
But the
team will never win if you do that, Trevor.
She's not a serial rebel. And he says she helped him get to the right balance, and her reward have the whip
Like I
withdrawn.
said, it's not about one incident. It is about the team. We campaigned as a team, we won as a team, we're going to govern as a team. If people think they're more important than the team, they need to think again.
OK, so who else is going to get spanked now?
Well,
because presumably there are several other MPs. There are other MPs who've done the same. In fact, by my reckoning, there are several other MPs who have rebelled many more times. I mean, you know the names. Why are these four being picked out?
It's really important that we all play the team game.
And my
Any
point
of us,
is,
me included,
why
will occasionally have concerns about something that is happening, and we'll go and speak to the relevant minister. That is the way to resolve your differences.
But why these
you can't be part of a government campaigning against
fairness? What about fairness?
I think it is fair.
Which your leader is constantly talking about.
I think it is fair that if you're part of a team, you should be required to play the team game. You can make your views known, but if you go too far outside, you're actually undermining the whole team.
Okay.
We can't allow that. We need to get these big changes through, the water reforms that I'm talking about. We're putting the wages are rising faster than for 10 years now. We want to deliver for the British people.
Just very quickly on this. Diane Abbott, she's never going to come back into the Parliamentary Party, is she?
Well, that will be in the hands of the people who are considering the facts.
Would you want to see her back?
Well, I'm very disappointed in Diane that, first of all, you know, she was initially suspended. She apologised for what she's done. She's come back in, and now she's repeated the things she said to start with. But it's out of my hands.
This is the end of her time as a Labour MP, it sounds like.
You know, I respect Diane. I've known Diane for many, many decades. I think it's a shame she did what she did.
Steve Reid, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
Well, let's see what our panel made of all that. With us throughout the morning, broadcaster and author Stephen Sacker, co-host of the Politics at Sam and Anne's podcast, Anne McElvoy, and the former Labour advisor John McTernan. Anne, we've got raw sewage and we've got raw politics, and we'll deal with the raw politics later. I'm not much of an open water swimmer myself, but how confident are you after hearing Steve Reid that it's fine now?
I'm very unconfident indeed, and I'm not a very brave swimmer, but I do go into the sea in Kent, just off Whitstable, just Southern Water responsible there for the infrastructure and also therefore for the recurrent sewage problem. And this is really something that's been a blight on that part of Kent, and not only them, and a lot of people off the coast all around the country have that. Just when people have got really into it, you know, exploring our own wonderful coast and spending more time maybe in the country on their holidays and things, they are actually finding themselves in quite dangerous situations. I mean, it's not very funny, you know, to get, and with children and older people to get these terrible bugs that you can get if you encounter sewage in the sea. So that's just the way that you experience it as a consumer, so to speak. But I have the same problem with
consumer's a bad word here, isn't it?
Well, the consumer, no, exactly. Yeah, be careful what you consume in the sea. The broader point is, you know, that these companies, and we've seen it also. It happens, you know, have crumbling infrastructure, crumbling pipes. You know how long it takes to get hold of a water company they're also chasing you to upgrade or to pay your bill quicker, and the service is absolutely terrible. I think in the background there is a problem here, and I'm not sure that Steve Reid entirely kind of fessed up to it. It's not just privatisation, which people can go back to the Thatcher era or blame privatisations that they don't like. Just public ownership is not really a solution here. That would not automatically bring more money in, clean out my sea and sort out my terrible pipes, hello Southern Water, and others. You know, I should say the Thames Water as well, obviously been in terrible trouble. It's when the markets then go to private equity because they are so debt-laden. Now we also have very unaccountable private equity companies in and out of our water industry. And nobody can really track what's going on. They're just grateful if they get some money to pay debt. And then when the companies go off again, as they do, I mean, Macquarie, the Australian company who's been in and out of the water industry, is involved in Southern Water, now was in Thames Water before. And where is the accountability for that? Maybe Mr. Reid might like to answer that question.
Well, indeed, and in fact, I think it's KKR, which is a giant PE firm, private equity firm in the United States, was going to take a stake, I think, in terms of water, but withdrew. And I think specifically said it was because they thought the government was hostile to them. Stephen?
Well, Thames Water, I mean, we shouldn't be too sort of metropolitan bias about it, but Thames Water is a really important issue right now because the company is pretty much insolvent and they are saddled not only with crumbling infrastructure which they can't afford to fix, but they're also saddled with more than £1 billion worth of fines, which I believe the government has said they're not going to allow Thames Water to escape from. So it may be in the coming weeks, months, who knows, that Thames Water will have to be put into temporary nationalisation. Now, the Starmer government has said it's not interested in nationalising the water industry, albeit we know the public actually thinks that would be a good idea. I think I saw a poll. Well, it may not be a good idea, but this is politics as well as reality.
Yeah,
and the politics
nationalise everything the public won't nationalise.
That's very true. But in essence, the government's going to have a problem, particularly with Thames Water. They may have to take it into temporary ownership, and then they're going to have to try and relaunch it back into the private sector. And if it is true that Ofwat is dead and there's going to be a new system of regulation, which may even be tougher on the bosses getting their bonuses, tougher on the shareholders getting their dividends, more fines, imprisonment possibly for bosses who get it wrong, who on earth is going to want to invest and put their money
pitch to the market
in this sector? So, you know, the government doesn't want to nationalise, but it's going to end up probably with Thames Water on its hands. And what on earth is it going to do?
John, that Steve Reeve he's talking about a revolution to keep my 60s song cycle going. Did it sound like a revolution to you?
Look, the issue that Anne and Stephen have touched on is the critical one. There's a failure here by the private sector. And when there's a private sector failure, the private sector should take its punishment, should take its lumps. And the issue that Thames Water, the KKR said, we're not going to get involved. The current owner's saying, we can't actually trade in this marketplace if you apply your pesky regulations to us. Those regulations, let's have a bit more sewage in the sea. You have to say to people, in this market, we believe markets work, and the way they work, they find out bad actors. And what happens to them? The shareholders, the bondholders, the creditors lose their shirts. That's the system working. And what Thames Water and KKR and various people are playing with, you know, a lot of the money in Thames Water is actually Chinese money and Abu Dhabi money. So the sovereign wealth funds in Thames Water, and they're saying, let us not take a hit to any of our money. No. The government has to. I think special measures, then the government acts like a VC or a PE, cleans the system out, cleans out the debt, and then puts it back in the private sector. If you cannot nationalise, then privatise, what's the power of the government?
Well, just to be fair, we're talking about Thames Water. More than the majority of Thames Water is owned by two pension funds, a Canadian Ontario pension fund and our university's pension fund. So this is not all. No,
the other half of that company is owned by Abu Dhabi and by China Investment Corporation. So and every pension scheme has a portfolio.
Yeah, but
not every investment has to come off.
But my point is, as a more general point, we can't have it both ways. We can't say the private sector's got to take its lumps, but also then tell the private sector, for example, you can't raise prices beyond this.
Well, that was one of the most interesting passages in your interview with the minister, because you kept pushing him on, you know, what does this mean for people's bills? Are you saying right now that this revolution you're talking about has to be tied to future increases in water bills for the folks of the country to be kept at inflation, not the 30% that we've seen in the last year or two?
Someone's got to pay.
Somebody's got to pay. And he seemed very reluctant to engage in that discussion about specifically what is going to happen to people's bills.
This is where politics hits. The rubber hits the road in politics, isn't it?
I don't see any way that in the end the consumer, as in not the one in the sea with the nose poke on, but the general water user across wherever you're watching, this is not going to end up with higher bills from this situation. Right? And I think this is the big problem, that to sort out the infrastructure problems that we have in Britain, at least whoever you blame in the past, whatever your kind of idea, and I don't think they're particularly good ideas about. I completely understand the need for temporary nationalisation. And I'm not saying that the way you laid it out is probably exactly what's going to happen. But that is a very different thing to the idea that if you simply nationalise it. I see a lot of campaigns around who I would otherwise agree with about the state of the water and keeping the pressure on, that think the solution is this one shot of nationalisation. It doesn't, because it didn't bring any more money in. So in the end, some money is going to come from somewhere. Some of it can come from government, but some of it's going to come from us.
Well, we'll no doubt hear a little bit more tomorrow when Sir John Cunliffe publishes his report, and we will hear from Steve Reed what his response is. I think we can guess already, though.
In the reeds.
All right, it is now 9 o'clock, and you are watching Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. In the last hour, the Environment Secretary's told this programme that the water industry is broken, but said he could cut sewage discharges in 5 years. Steve Reed said Labour MPs must act as a team and not undermine the team. OK, well, this weekend, Sky News has been bringing you some extraordinary reporting from live on the ground in Syria. Sectarian clashes between Bedouin and Druze fighters in the south of the country have left hundreds of people dead. The Syrian president says there's now a ceasefire in the southern city of Sueda, but our teams have seen horrifying scenes of executed and burned bodies lying on the streets. Our special correspondent, Alex Crawford, is there, and I can speak to Alex now. Good morning, Alex.
Morning, Trevor.
Well, I've got to say, you know, I've been in war zones myself and so on, but I have to say your report that I saw last night is absolutely extraordinary. What is the situation there this morning?
Well, we're actually at one of the key checkpoints out on the outskirts of Sueda city. We're about 20 kilometres away from the city centre. You can see behind me, probably, I hope, a large group of Syrian government internal security forces who have been brought into the area. Now, over the past few hours, the situation definitely appears to have calmed down a bit. I wouldn't describe the ceasefire as anything other than fragile and shaky, and it could go either way at the moment. But overnight they have erected berms and built barricades to stop the hundreds, thousands of Arab tribal fighters who'd massed around this area and who were battling Druze militia inside Sueda city. They're all being kept away, we're 20 kilometres away from the city centre, and they have withdrawn. Just in the last half hour or so, a number of tribal leaders have been addressing them and telling them that we've agreed, we're going to work with the government, we're going to retreat, we're going to lay down our weapons for now and see what happens inside the city centre. There are still tens of thousands of civilians who are believed to be trapped inside the city centre. The city centre has no electricity, no water, the food is scarce, the hospitals are absolutely packed with the dead and injured, and a number of people who couldn't move at all when we were in the city centre yesterday. The ceasefire was meant to take hold yesterday, but it clearly hadn't. They were struggling to implement the ceasefire. There was a lot of very violent clashes, and we saw a lot of dead bodies on the streets. They appeared to have been executed. A number of them had gunshot wounds to the back of their heads. There have been reports of kidnappings. There's a lot of material which is going viral on social media posts, and that is incentivising all of these these fighters and the fighting. And President al-Shara, who's head of a very new government, having come to power and toppling Bashar al-Assad, the long-time dictator, just in December, has been really struggling to keep a hold of this situation. Tensions are still very inflamed because they're not sure. They keep on saying, these Arab tribal groups, that they are not against the Druze, that this is not a sectarian fight, although it looks very much like that to outsiders like myself and many others, but they're directing their ire, their anger against one particular leader, a cleric called Hikmat Hajjari, who's leading a particular Druze faction. He's a very influential, powerful cleric, but who has called on Israel to intervene midweek, and you saw the bombings of key military installations, the Ministry of Defence in Damascus, as well as a number of forces positions here. Those airstrikes, Israeli airstrikes, killed hundreds of Syrian troops. So it's been very difficult since then. That led to hundreds of thousands of tribal fighters from all over Syria massing in this point, and they've been absolutely brutal mayhem and total anarchy inside the city, with mass looting, mass pillaging, and it looks like a substantial number of deaths.
We saw you in a live firefight yesterday, Alex, and also you've obviously been covering what's happened in some of the Druze districts, and I am pretty sure that we haven't seen the worst of it because we can't actually show it. What do you think the Druze are going to do in response to what has happened? Their homes have been burnt out and so on.
I think we need to separate the Druze groups, because there are large numbers of Druze people who want to work with President al-Shara and be part of an inclusive new Syria without dictator Bashar al-Assad. And there is this influential Druze faction, which is led by Hikmat al-Hajri, who do not. They feel very vulnerable. They do not trust the new government. They see them as Islamic jihadists, mainly unreformed, because they have the backing of Israel, who sees the new government in similar terms, or at least a number of the key ministers have called the government and the president an unreformed jihadist. They have a lot of power and influence because of the backing that they're getting from Israel. However, America, another key global player, has indicated its displeasure with the Israeli strikes in Syria. There's a lot of discontent with the government for withdrawing its troops from Sweda city in the first place. And President al-Shara is, on the face of it at least, appears to be trying to calm the situation and promote a much more inclusive Syria. I think the Druze faction that is led by Hikmat Hajri has already shown it is very capable of upsetting a massive, complicated apple cart, and they have been accused of a number of substantial brutalities and atrocities, along with the other ethnic minority that resides in that city, the Bedouins, who all of these Arab tribes have flocked to support and defend. So it is not an easy, straightforward map that you're looking at, ethnic map, international political map. It is extremely complex. And I think most people in Syria, though, and especially the ones around here that we've been seeing, I mean, we've been talking to doctors, engineers, architects who've travelled from Aleppo and Damascus, who have got guns on their backs now and are saying, we're doctors, we're here to primarily provide humanitarian aid, but we're also going to fight a man, the Druze militia, Hikmat al-Hajri, who they see as a criminal gang leader who now has the backing of Israel. Israel, of course, as you know, its narrative is very different. It's portraying this as a rush to defend the Druze. But everyone we speak to says that they want a united Syria, and they definitely do not want outside international interference. So very, very complex and difficult to work out who has carried out all the killings. There has definitely been atrocities on both sides.
Alex, we can see you're in the middle of something quite extraordinary there. We don't normally do this, but we're going to play the whole of your report. I think it's an exemplary piece of reporting, if I may say so. We're probably going to have to let you go now so you can actually do some more of that. But thank you so much and stay safe. We're now going to play your show.
We entered the besieged, mainly Druze city of Sweda and saw a city on fire. The road out was clogged with Arab fighters withdrawing with their looted goods. They left a trail of destruction and thousands of trapped civilians behind them. This was meant to be a ceasefire, but the warring factions clearly weren't part of it. There's no electricity in the city, internet is cut, food and water is scarce, and there are thousands of families still bunkered down in their homes amongst all of this.
and some heavy weaponry coming in now. You can see lots of smoke down there, look, and people running all over the bit. They're firing across the street. Well, it's absolute mayhem right now. They were basically ambushed. We waited for them to move forward, and then as soon as large numbers of them were there, they got hit. Oh, there's more coming in.
The Syrian president had sent his security forces to the south to prevent even more Arab fighters entering the city. The ceasefire included Israel agreeing not to bomb the government forces. But once in position, there was furious resistance. And the new government's men seem powerless against the armed groups. And these fighters don't much like these disagreements being filmed. The streets of Sweda city are strewn with the casualties of this orgy of violence, many with shots to the head, execution style. There are 6 in this pile, again with shots to the head. They'd also been set alight. Others have been burned beyond recognition. Horrific images, but which demonstrate the wanton brutality that's been going on here. It's hard to say who's carrying out these killings, but the fury is real, and the desire for revenge is fueled by images online.
So are you going back to fight now?
Yes, we will fight to the last drop of blood.
The city has descended into anarchy, and in this chaotic mayhem, it's a free-for-all right now. The Arab fighters have been grabbing whatever they can. Livestock's been taken, but also farm equipment, water containers, even shrubbery. There are some attempts at trying to stop this pillaging from the Druze city, but there are far too few security forces to take on this mass marauding. We saw just a handful of looters made to unload their stash of stolen goods, tipped out and left on the side of the road. There is going to be little to return to in parts of the city once the fighting stops. The Interior Ministry blames both sides, including the Druze faction led by Hikmat al-Hajri.
There's a lot of dead bodies around in Sweda city, and they look like they've been executed by the tribal fighters going in, because many of them
Not only the tribal fighters.
Not only.
Many of them killed by the militias, which became to Al-Hajri. And I want to see in 2 eyes, not in 1 eye. When we see in 2 eyes, we can solve the problem.
Civilians are suffering most. This Druze woman was brought out of Sweda city to the nearby field hospital by Arab fighters. She'd been shot through her jaw by a sniper who also hit her in the shoulder and arm. Those trapped inside the city say they cannot move out of their homes for fear of being shot. A ceasefire cannot come soon enough for them. A humanitarian corridor is being arranged to try to transport some of the 30,000 people believed to be pinned down in Sweda. But first, the fighting has to stop.
Back to our panel now, Stephen Sacker, Anne McElvoy and John McTernan. Stephen, what do you make of it?
Well, first, I would salute Alex Crawford and her team for some extraordinary reporting, because it is very, very dangerous where she is right now. I think worst case scenario, what this is part of is the potential for the full-on breakup of Syria as a unitary state. That is a real possibility. You know, it is a patchwork country with major religious and ethnic differences across the country. You know, there is a Sunni population, there's a Shia population. That was, of course, the religious grouping that the Assad family came from. They ruled Syria.
The Alawites, they were a minority within
the Alawites within the Shia community. And they ruled Syria with a brutal, repressive rod for 5 decades. That's come to an end. President Shara, who has a background in Al-Qaeda-affiliated Sunni extremism, is now sitting in the president's office. And what's really interesting about this is that he wants to build, a strong unitary state, and the Americans, the Trump administration, appear to have some faith that he could do that. But at the same time, it seems the Israeli government, led by Benjamin Netanyahu, is determined to try and keep Syria weak and divided. Now, Netanyahu looks at what's happened to the Druze communities in Sweden and those towns close to the Israeli border, and he says, I am going to protect these people, because of course he has a very significant Druze population on the other side of that border. And many of the Druze who live in the occupied Golan Heights and in other parts of Israel want to see Israel protect their fellow Druze people inside Syria. It's extraordinarily complex, but at the heart of it is, can Syria survive as a unitary state? And at the moment, I fear that is not at all clear.
Yeah. It's worth saying, of course, that there are Druze populations in Israel, Lebanon, Syria, and, as you say, Golan Heights. And they are, I think the Israeli intervention was supposed to support that minority.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure, when you say weak and divided, do you mean that that's the aim of Israeli policy? Or do you mean in order to protect these Druze populations Trevor refers to, who are spread, that is driving this policy, which has, it's not the only thing that's responsible for the violence we're saying, but I just think it would be a fair point to make.
No, I think it's a good question, whether the Israelis, with their intervention, actively want to see Syria fragmented, or whether that's just a byproduct of what they're actually doing, which is a more specific protection policy. For me, just reading a lot of commentary that's coming out of Washington as well as coming out of the region, I think there is a real difference here between the Americans and the Israelis about what they feel the impact is going to be. And there are some who believe that, yes, Mr. Netanyahu feels this is a key moment where he can, in essence, wield more power in the long term inside Syria.
And this is the big question. The only player globally who can affect and create stability in the Middle East is America. At the moment, they're backing Netanyahu, but Netanyahu is exporting division to the violence in Iran, the violence here, the danger of a fragmented Middle East. And we've seen the 20 years it's taken to rebuild Iraq after the Iraq War. The instability within the Middle East is terrible, as we saw, for the people who live there. But it's a massive problem unless the Americans can get a grip on it.
But surely, I mean, I don't think it's entirely the case that it's only the fault of Netanyahu in this, because if you have this very weak government, I mean, we don't know really whether they ever really got over the Al-Qaeda years or they didn't. Both America and Germany are very, very strongly backing it in the hope that that is the case. I think our own Foreign Office is probably, and intelligence services are slightly more hedged on this issue, which I don't mean to impute that the leadership is now acting as argument, but we know that it is a very fragile and vociferous movement. So it doesn't only take Israel getting involved to make it difficult.
In the end, it doesn't help creating two states of Israel and Palestine to have more collapse all around.
Well, indeed. So it wouldn't really be in Israel's interest.
I think it's in Netanyahu's interest, not Israel.
And I think what Alex brought out in her report, and again, we should all, I guess, bow to the fact Alex is there and she's hearing things that we can't possibly hear here in the studio in London. Alex is reporting that the Druze community in Syria is actually deeply divided.
Yes.
There is this one particular commander in Sweden who is very much wanting Israel to intervene, demanding that Netanyahu come and protect these Druze people. But there are many other Druze groups and leaders who do not want the Israelis in their country and who actually, it seems, are prepared to work with President al-Shara to make sure that Syria doesn't fall apart. I mean, this is a crucial moment. I don't know which way it's going to go, but I do know it's hugely important.
It's incredibly important in terms of the knock-on effects and refugee streams, just to bring it a little closer to home. Obviously, the prime interest should be for the people whose lives are at risk of being lost on the ground, which Alex has reflected.
No, that's an excellent point.
But it really is. And I mean, on the Merz visit last week, I was speaking with a lot of in touch with Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor's team, on their first visit to the the UK. Their policy of trying to basically to solidify their problems at their borders and perception of out of control asylum and irregular migration. And what happens in Syria immediately knocks on to them, and that drives very far-right support in Germany. To a lesser extent here, but let's not think that what we're seeing on these screens stops in the
It's an interconnected world. Everything has,
Well, indeed, we are actually going to. This is something I'm going to ask our next, or I have asked our next guest about, because next we're going to hear from the Conservative Shadow Housing Secretary, Kevin Hollinrake.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Turkey is burying its dead.
Whole families died in this collapse. Generations wiped out. I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
Anyone could say, I'll do that, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
Sky News, get the full story first. I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach. This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Let's turn to the Conservatives now. A little earlier, I spoke to the Shadow Housing Secretary, Kevin Hollinrake. Kevin Hollinrake, do you agree with those who say that it's time for a new regulator for the water industry?
Well, good morning. I mean, I'm not against regulation. We won't see cleaner rivers if we don't get good regulation. So I'm worried it might just be shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic. So it's really important the regulator is effective, and we put in a lot of measures to give Ofwat more powers to regulate the water industry, and lots of those things were very effective. But nevertheless, there's a lot more to do. So I welcome what's been announced today, halve the number of sewage outflows by 2030. All those things are possible because of the measures we put in place, but clearly more needs to be done. And I support good regulation if it's effective.
You talk about the measures you put in place, and forgive me if this is a cheap jibe, but you know that's what we journalists do. Some would say that you launched the Titanic when you privatised the water industry.
Well, I don't accept that. I don't think any of the major parties is, maybe Reform are, but are proposing a renationalisation of the water industry. We've seen £200 billion of investment since we privatised the water industry, and that investment just wasn't happening when they were owned by the public sector. So that's.
But the water companies themselves say that the problem is that there's not enough investment. They are saying they need another, getting on for £300 billion over the next couple of decades. Now, that's not going to happen when they've also got to answer to shareholders. And by the way, shareholders are not sort of terrible American capitalists or whatever. They're pension funds. So they're in a bind, aren't they? And you created that by privatising the industry.
Well, of course, shareholders need to see a return. People won't invest if you don't see a return. But in a situation where you've got a private sector monopoly, it's perfectly possible to produce surpluses to return to shareholders whilst investing. Now, if in a nationalised scenario, the one you're outlining, well, the choice isn't to shareholders, it's to taxpayers. And where is the priority going to be? Is it going to be building new schools, new hospitals, or is it going to be investing in replacing the antiquated system we have in the UK that's been around here since the Victorian era? That's the problem we've got. You've got a Victorian-era sewage system, and you've got climate change, which is driving these different weather patterns. So that's the challenge you've got. I think you're more likely to see that sustained investment. In fact, we have seen that sustained investment in a private sector situation.
Yeah, but in the private sector situation, you dodged the choice by saying, OK, let the private sector deal with it. And actually what ended up happening is that the private sector, of course, it has invested more, but it's invested more by charging bill payers a lot more. In London, some bills have gone up by 50%. Surely that's not what you had in mind when you privatised it.
Well, if you adjust it for inflation, actually water bills are much lower than they were 20 years ago. That's the reality of this. At the same time,
nobody's adjusting wage increases for inflation. The point is, we're having to pay more of our hard-earned.
In cash terms, you're paying more, but adjusted for inflation, you're paying less. That's the reality. But whether this is privatised or nationalised, and I think it's better in a private sector environment, difficult choices have to be made. I do not think you're going to see a government decide to invest in our antiquated Victorian-era sewage systems if they've also got a choice of whether they build new hospitals, new schools. All these difficult choices have to be made. The answer to this is good regulation, making sure that these water companies can't pay bonuses where there has been fault on behalf of the water companies, or restricting dividends. All those things are happening. You saw Ofwat, the regulator, fined Thames Water £18 million and reclaim the £130 million dividend it paid to one of its sister companies. So all this thing can happen in regulated environments. At the same time, Thames Water invested £5 billion in the Thames Tideway Tunnel. So all these things can happen. At the same time, you're trying to provide good water at good value to for those consumers.
The failure of the water network is not just a problem about sewage and water, but it's an obstacle to economic growth. Does it bother you, or does it concern you, that the Environment Agency blocked the building of 7,000 homes in Oxford for the best part of a year because of concerns about water supply?
Well, we need to have a system where we build infrastructure more effective, be it houses or reservoirs, all these things need to happen. We're not building enough reservoirs. That's something I'm dealing with as part of the planning changes. There's a planning bill going through Parliament now that should make it easier to build reservoirs, to improve the water supply so we don't have that block on new homes. But there's no doubt we've gone backwards in terms of our ability to deliver infrastructure in this country. That's why we propose reforms whilst in government. That's where we'll support some of the reforms the government's due to make in the planning infrastructure bill, although there's some things we're not happy about at all.
Do the reforms that you support include, for example, or should they include, taking away the power of organisations like Natural England and the Environment Agency to stop new developments, for example, in housing? Because the government said they were going to do that, but actually they apparently are now coming forward with amendments that will give Natural England an effective veto. Where are you going to stand on that?
Well, the answer is yes, we do want to take away those powers in certain circumstances. For example, and we tried to do that through the planning reform whilst we were in government. We proposed an amendment. Currently, there's over 100,000 new homes due to be built. They've been stopped being built by Natural England because of something called nutrient neutrality. This is phosphates and nitrates getting into water supply. And the house building sector has very little impact on those kind of problems. Yet they've been blocked from being developed. That can't be right. It can't be right. It costs 8 times as much to build a kilometre of high-speed rail in the UK compared to France. There are many things we've got wrong in this system.
So you want to get rid of nutrient neutrality?
In terms of house building, I don't think the house building industry is responsible for nutrient neutrality. Largely, that's catchment area, the solutions around catchment area farming.
All right. We heard this week from the Reform Party that they won't be able to reduce council tax given the statutory commitments of local authorities, particularly adult social care. I don't want to get into the issue of whether you think reform are good or not good, but I think it's interesting. Do you think the time has now come to rethink the local council financing? How many councils do you expect to fail in the next year or so, and what would you do about it?
Well, one thing I must say about the whole point, what Zia Youssef said on that, is that we've got to take responsibility for our promises in terms of politics. Saying you're going to do one thing prior to an election and then do something completely different. There were huge promises made about council tax cuts. We said that couldn't be done, and that's because of the sustainability of local government finances. The answer to your question is yes, we need to look at this differently, of course, and that's the one luxury you have in opposition is taking a few years to look at exactly how we do that. There are real strains on the system. Most of this spend you see in the local authorities are statutory responsibilities given to it by Parliament. We've got to look at those statutory responsibilities, make sure that it is an affordable system. Otherwise, these councils are going to fall over. There's no doubt social care is a huge problem for local authorities. So is children with special educational needs, home and school transport. There are huge pressures on the system. It's wrong that anybody could say, we can run this differently, we do a bit of cost cutting and we'll solve all these problems and cut council tax. That's just not realistic.
So actually, you've got these policy groups that you're putting together.
Commissions, yeah.
Commissions. Will they consider the reform of council tax, which hasn't been reformed, now, for nearly 35, 40 years?
Well, it depends what you mean by reform. What I am concerned about...
Well, just revaluation of tax.
Well, I'm concerned about that. I think that's the wrong thing to do. This government says is going to go there. It means effectively a wealth tax on expensive properties. I think that's the wrong thing. I don't like wealth taxes. I think...
Well, you've just been telling me how much you need to reform, and the simplest reform, you're basically going, no, you can't do that, because some rich people will be cheesed off about it.
Well, you're making a false choice. You think this is all about raising more tax. I don't believe that. I think there are ways of running a system differently that does mean councils have sustainable finances without putting more tax, without levying more tax.
Well, I don't get this. You've just been telling me the pressures on councils because of adult social care, they're going to need more money. So where's the money going to come from if it's not from tax? I mean, you need to level with the electorate, don't you?
Yes, we do. And I'll be very clear. This is not just about raising more money. You can reshape the system. There are other ways of delivering adult social care needs and...
Does reshape the system mean cuts?
I'm not saying anything in terms of our future policy right now because we haven't got those policies together.
Okay.
I mean, one thing that Kemi Badenoch has said she would do. I mean, look where Keir Starmer is now in terms of he's come into government, promised the earth, U-turn time and time again, winter fuel allowance, on welfare, all these U-turns, because he hasn't properly thought through what he's going to do.
Very interesting, but you were just about to tell me what Kemi Badenoch's going to do, which I'm more interested in.
Which Kemi Badenoch is going to make sure we develop our policies in opposition so that they stand the test of time. Because one thing about Kemi is, in my experience, what she says she's going to do, she does.
All right. Well, OK, well, we'll have to wait and see, it sounds like. One quick question. There are protests about an asylum hotel being reopened in Epping, near London, on Friday. How worried are you about the prospect of further unrest on this issue?
Yeah, I'm very worried about it. I mean, I was down in Hillingdon this week looking at where they've got the highest level of asylum seekers per capita in the country. I'm very worried about this, and we're seeing numbers going up in terms of the small boat crossings, up 40% this year. So we need a solution to this, and we had a solution. And there's no other way you can tackle this without the deterrent. We had a solution, which is Rwanda. We know people would not come to this country if they thought they would then be sent to Rwanda and have their asylum claim assessed in Rwanda. That's the reality. That's the only solution. There's no thing that'll work, and Labour scrapping that, something we passed after they opposed it 134 times in Parliament. We eventually passed it, and then they scrapped it.
Kevin Hollinrake, thank you for your time this morning.
Thanks, Trevor.
In just a moment, we'll hear once again from our panel.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Back to our panel, Stephen Stacker, Anne McElvoy and John McTurnan. John, Kevin Hollinrake picked up a point that you guys were talking about at the end of the previous part, which is what happens when there's instability and it lands up on our shores, small boats, all of that. And we're seeing some of that out of this disturbance in Epping, which was about an asylum hotel. Are you worried about that?
Look, I think the law and order brings out the best in Keir. We saw it in the Southport riots. He knew what to do. He knew what he thought should be done. He speeded the whole process up. And he also knows how to talk about it, as does his AG, Attorney General Richard Helmer. You have to have order, and you have to stop the kind of the violent riots in Northern Ireland around Ballymena. There are now people locally in Ballymena saying that they did what they wanted. The refugees have gone. You have to have, one, stability in the Middle East, and we all have to work hard for that because we do not want people displaced. It's not a question of being a refugee. Most refugees I know say, we want to go home. Most people who are refugees stay very close to the place from which they're displaced. The stability is one thing. Then here, we have to work with our European partners. The best thing about re-establishing a good relationship with Europe is that both Chancellor Merz and President Macron will come to the UK and do a bilateral deal with Keir Starmer, a man that they can believe in. And also, it's been the same Prime Minister for a whole year. That's one thing. He's talked about the record the Labour got. What's the achievement? The best achievement? Had the same Prime Minister for 12 months. And so I think, and then you have to do, something's going wrong in the Home Office processing. It's not fast enough. The faster it's decided whether you can be dealt with, then you won't be in a hotel. You'll either be on a plane home, or you will actually be being integrated into the country.
Anne, what do you reckon?
I agree with John that I think the Prime Minister knows what he wants to do to restore order in a situation like this. I think he has a very good grip of that, and that former experience as head of the Crown Prosecution Service comes into its own. I'm less convinced, and my learned friend here, that his tone and his sort of emotional connection with a lot of the population is where it needs to be on these issues. Because if you simply say, when things have broken out or gone as tragically and badly wrong as they did in Southport and the riots that followed, well, we're going to lock everybody up because order is important. I mean, yeah, we get that. I mean, that is right. That's a necessary but not sufficient response. I think what he has more difficulty with, because it does obviously pits him against the challenge from reform, mainly from reform, from others, but mainly from reform, which is how angry people feel about this, and the desire to maintain his very Labour liberal consensus that we do need an asylum system. We should be giving asylum to people. I mean, we've seen it sort of go very badly wrong because of another malfunction of the state in the Afghan situation at the moment. It's just becoming very unpopular with a lot of people. And there are a lot of people, I don't want to lazily use the phrase liberal elites, because probably in some way we could all be accused of being a bit in some elite or other. But it's like, actually, they're really cross about this, and just saying, I know how to restore order when it's gone wrong is probably not enough. And I think there needs to be, I think there's still thinking to be done on that. And you see Keir Starmer kind of struggles with it because he tries it, does the island a stranger speech, backs off the island, then says, no, I did actually mean, I'm now confused and I follow this stuff 7 days a week.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, one of the things that we talk quite a lot about over the period on this programme is the way in which foreign affairs and conflicts abroad are now landing up on our streets. And this has been talking about one way Syria happens. We've all seen it in relation to Israel-Palestine landing up on our streets. And it's the Afghan leak this week was a third example.
Absolutely, Trevor. Afghanistan, and what we've learned in the last week about this catastrophic error made by, it seems, people inside special forces, somebody who leaks thousands of names of Afghans who may be at risk, and indeed some British serving military personnel as well. A catastrophic error which, you know, because it was hushed up and the super injunction was imposed, has led in recent days to, for example, Nigel Farage and some of his Reform associates suggesting that as a result of the numbers of Afghans who've been brought in, that serial sex abusers have been entering the country from Afghanistan, with, as far as I can see, zero evidence for that particular claim. But nonetheless, it feeds into a general sense that many people in this country have, which Reform plays upon, that the system doesn't work, it's out of control, and that communities across the United Kingdom are being damaged. And it's frankly a really toxic development, and the Starmer government is going to have to address it in ways that right now it doesn't seem to have figured out quite how to do.
Stephen's right about there's a role in this of rumour and disinformation, and it's a very dangerous thing when Nigel Farage makes an allegation which then has the credibility of not just an MP, the credibility of a party leader, the credibility of the man who is actually the only real opposition to the government, the current Labour government. And so there's something where you actually...
Only real opposition?
I think, well, obviously the backbenchers are a bit of a real opposition for the Labour government too. But the Conservatives are not, in my view, not in the game at all. The Conservatives are fighting for their right to exist as a political party. They're not contesting to be the alternative government. They don't look like the alternative government. Nor does...
OK, well, look, in the moment we... oh, I'm here, aren't I? In just a moment we'll hear once again from our panel.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. Free wherever you get your news.
I'm Mark Stone, and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C. Sky News, get the full story first.
I'm Katie Spencer, and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent.
I'm Lisa Dowd, and I'm one of Sky's Midlands correspondents. The reason I do this job is because you never know where it's going to lead.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
If there's anyone who might know how to fix Northern Ireland's devolved government, it's the American architect.
Changes in circumstance require changes in approach.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland.
I confirm that I am willing to take up the office of First Minister. My election to the post of First Minister demonstrates the change that's happening on this island.
Catholics and Protestants on different sides, now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19 and end up in hospital, religion's nothing.
People here are adept at finding hope amid adversity. That's the spirit of a place that punches way above its weight. We help you understand the world with us. A toxic blue-green algae now poisoning Lough Neagh. It's breaking your heart what has happened here.
It is.
This is a vital resource, a national treasure, now fighting for its very life. They are effectively surrounded by Northern Ireland, and that makes this the most unlikely of international frontiers.
If there's a hard border, I think it'll cripple the country.
Winter is coming. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach.
This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Back to our panel, Stephen Sacker, Anne McElvoy, John McTernan. Stephen, we're getting a lot of visitors in this next week or so. The Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, and Donald Trump is visiting some of his golf courses.
You can't keep Donald Trump away. He's coming again to survey his different golf courses in Scotland, and then, of course, he's coming back in a month or two's time for the state visit. So it's a big week for Keir Starmer, and I think a very relief-filled week for Keir Starmer, because if one surveys his first year in office, then I think you could say that he's been much more successful and had a better time overseas than he's had at home in terms of his foreign policy, particularly his trade deals, and you can guarantee that over the next week he's going to be crowing about the bilateral trade deals he's done with some of the world's most important nations. So he's got that to crow about. There will also be very interesting discussion with Donald Trump, if indeed he goes to Scotland to meet Trump, which it seems he's going to do, about the state of play in Ukraine and in Gaza. I've just been reading in the last few minutes that there again is talk that maybe there's some real positive movement toward a Gaza ceasefire. We will see. But I think as a general point, Starmer has done pretty well on the world stage, and this is a week where he can exhibit some of the advances he's made.
John, does this work, actually? You know, spin doctor, I wouldn't call you a spin doctor. No. I wouldn't insult you. But as someone who studies political strategy, does this work being, you know, the globe-trotting, respected statesperson? Does it work with the electorate?
Well, as we discussed earlier in the show, what happens internationally hits domestically. And so people do, at some level, voters understand that actually, if you don't sort relationships globally, then there will be a blowback in the UK. So I think it gives you some authority. It also helps people feel there's something to you. When you see your Prime Minister respected on the international stage, as Keir is, and as Tony Blair was, and others were, then you get a feeling. The problem is the pace. The pace of international relations is glacial. So you go to something, you've had months, maybe even years sometimes, to think about this issue. When an issue comes to you and domestically, you have to decide that morning. You have to decide in that hour. And there's a tension between the international style and the slowness, which really suits Keir's lawyerly nature, the way he looks at all the evidence. And there's something about the communication, Anne touched on it earlier on. How do you align with the vote of the public? I think people feel Donald Trump is disruptive to the global economy, disruptive to politics, but it's probably a good thing to be on his best side. And that's a good message, I think.
I would agree with that. I think it's broadly right. I think there is a bit of we're seeing a lot of leaders who are can tell themselves they're doing well on the international stage and then go home to find that the house is sort of burning.
The house is burning.
It's really happened with Merz as well. I was in that press conference, with Merz and Starmer. They were both, getting on very well. They had a big agreement, a big meaty one on defence and some sort of border control things, all looking really good. Merz went back to find this huge firefight over abortion, which is really threatening the coherence of his early coalition. Keir Starmer, as we know, is like one damn thing after another, and ended up half of this international press conference discussing why he'd suspended Labour rebels.
Yeah.
Well, I wondered, John, is there a slight whiff of dead cattery going on here? That the government's had its troubles with welfare reform and all the rest of it, and suddenly we were talking about people being suspended from the Labour Party, which is very important to people in the Labour Party, but, compared with other stuff.
And to be fair to all four of them, and even Rachel Maskell, who I know and like, they're not even household names in their own households. It's anonymous people who've been picked on, and it's led. But for me, the question is, why have you chosen those 4 out of the 47 who rebelled? Why have you chosen Rachel Maskell, who's only rebelled on this issue, And I think, whereas why not Meg Hillier, who actually wrote and drafted the Reasoned Amendment and got the 120 people together? Who's the most organised? Who's the most involved? And it feels as though they got down and they chose people who they thought wouldn't fight back. But Rachel's making a good case for herself on the airways.
Well, isn't it? There's a broader inconsistency problem too, and I think you alluded to it in your earlier interview with Steve Reed. The messaging is so confused, almost comedically silly, because on the one hand, you know, the message is, we're so pleased that you made this stand and you did rebel because it's brought us to this collective place which is more sensible. We're going to go at welfare reform at a slower pace. So thank you very much. Thanks for making us see sense.
Now let's suspend you.
Oh, and by the way, you're suspended. I mean, where's the logic in that?
It's known as the doctrine of ripe time, isn't it?
Oh, that's true, yeah.
I mean, I do agree. It is, I mean, you put it very well, Stephen. It's completely sort of incoherent. At the same time, it means you went too far. I mean, let's just, to reflect the Prime Minister's view for just like a couple of seconds into number 10. It's like, if nothing were done, I think the big worry is that this would happen again, and that there would be the push on the two-child benefit cap, etc., and that his authority would just gradually, or rather rapidly, corrode. Now, you may argue
there is another lesson. This government's only had 2 bad months: July last year with winter fuel payments, and June this year with disability benefits. The 2 times they tried and failed to use benefit cuts to give them some headroom financially. What if their lesson is not we should punish people? What if the lesson was, let's not turn benefits on and off? Be more careful about what you propose. And the problem with the government is the government's done so many great things, I could list them. It interferes with itself. It gets in its own way too often. That's the actual lesson. So don't... And some of this is a tantrum and an acting out. I'm so annoyed with myself for ruining the first year of this government, I'm going to pick on you guys.
OK, well, we are now entering into the summer period where everybody, I think, in politics is hoping it's all going to be going down. But it won't. We're going to be here next week. Sophie's on every night at 7, and I'll be back 08:30 next Sunday.